5:30. And it's the right time to begin, looks like. While we can wait a couple of minutes for a few more participants to join, but I think we shall begin with the fundamentals and the introduction. So, greetings and a very good evening to all of you today. I'm Shalini Dabholkar, the Chief Operating Officer of India SME Accelerator Network, and also your host today. I wish you all a very warm welcome at 5:30 today. As a business accelerator network, we have been continuing our efforts through various initiatives, providing micro level support to small businesses in different industries. Today, with a specific objective of helping MSMEs related to the IT and ITES sector to navigate critical challenges, related to third-party transactions and international trade. We have an exclusive panel discussion brought to you in association with HSBC. And the topic for discussion today is transfer pricing challenges and solutions for SMEs. Since March 2020, all of us know that MSMEs have been severely impacted by COVID, wave 1, wave 2, and probably even wave 3 ahead. But the unprecedented business crisis has posed challenges for every business in whatever form, in different forms actually. And there is a struggle to regain momentum and revive the growth engine. Well, this has been a little different for the IT and ITES industry, which has actually had a lot more to gain in the same period than to lose in comparison to many other industries. Having said that, the business crisis definitely has pushed people to think a little differently, to review their business transactions, their global trade especially, and the related party transactions, which is why transfer pricing becomes very, very relevant and also very important in minimizing business risks on one hand and in maximizing the business benefits on the other hand. So to provide MSMEs with a multi-dimensional perspective to this topic, we have with us today an esteemed panel, and I have the privilege of introducing them to you one by one. So I begin with Mr. Pankil Sangvi. He is the partner with Tax and Regulatory Services at BDO. He has more than 18 years of professional experience with a focus on domestic taxation, international tax, and transfer pricing engagements. Prior to joining BDO in India, he's worked with larger accounting firms and has diverse experience in servicing multinationals, Indian groups, startups, and MSMEs. He has led several engagements in India and internationally across industries like IT, ITES, engineering services, manufacturing, consumer markets, telecom, etc. Pankil has contributed to several Indian business newspapers and professional magazines. Welcome, Pankil.
Thank you. Thank you so much to be here. Great to be here.
Great. The next we have in line is Mr. Ashish Jain. He heads the global finance and procurement for Lumina Datamatics as their CFO and head global procurement. Ashish manages mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, and joint venture partnerships. He spent 20 plus years in finance, audit, taxation, business planning, and budgeting. Ashish is a ranked chartered accountant and a DITM. He holds certifications in Six Sigma Black Belt and is also an ISO lead auditor. As a welcome, Ashish, I'd also like to add that he's worked earlier with organizations like Hapag Lloyd Global Services, Mahindra Life Spaces, Tata Internet, and Aditya Birla Group. Welcome, Ashish.
Thanks.
We now have next with us Mr. G.S. Venkatraman. He's the Chief Financial Officer of Subex and has over 25 years of industry experience. He's been instrumental in leading significant shareholder wealth creation in Subex, where the market cap of Subex moved from about 325 crores in November 18 to about 2,000 crores currently. He's been recognized among the top 100 CFOs for 2021 by CFO India under the innovation category. Prior to his current role, he's been the finance controller at Mindtree and worked with large companies like Accenture, Wipro, Pepsi, and others in the area of enterprise risk management, project financials, financial reporting, business planning, and so on. Welcome to you, Mr. Venkatraman.
Thank you, Shalini, and happy to be part of this discussion today. And let's hope for an interesting discussion.
Great. We now have Mr. Vaibhav Gupta. He's currently working as the Director of Business Banking and heads Southern India Business Banking at HSBC India. He's been with HSBC for 23 years, having experience in both retail and corporate banking. In his current role, Vaibhav is leading the IT and ITES sector initiatives within HSBC Business Banking and also leads the India-US corridor. Welcome to you, Vaibhav.
Hi, and welcome everyone on behalf of HSBC. Hope we'll have an interesting and insightful session and a useful session for especially for IT companies. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Shalini.
Wonderful. So I think with that, I'd like to just add a little bit that I'm going to be moderating today's panel discussion with all of you. And, my quick words to the participants who are here, I can see great numbers increasing by, every minute. So participants, you are likely to gain maximum value out of the session only by interacting. So, I request all of you to interact with the panelists by asking as many real life questions as you can for various business scenarios, use the chat box and the Q&A box available at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your questions here anytime during the session and feel free to keep doing so. The panel discussion is likely to last about 40 odd minutes, after which it will be followed by a Q&A session exclusively. During this time, the panelists will try to address each and every query of yours one by one. Yeah. So with that and without any further delay, let's begin today's session. I'm going to begin the session by triggering a question to you, and I'll begin with Mr. Pankaj. So Pankaj, to you, the fundamental question is, okay, for some of us who are participating, what is transfer pricing and how do the rules and regulations really impact business operations?
Yeah, great. Good evening to all the participants. Shalini, that's actually a fairly technical question, which I will try to make it as business focused as possible, given that our target audience are really not tax experts, but more business folks. So as I said, technically, transfer pricing comes into play whenever there is a international related party transaction. This is basically an income tax provision. So from an income tax perspective, in case there is an Indian company having a transaction with, and I'm just taking an example, say of a US, either a subsidiary or a holding company, it could be any transaction. That transaction would need to be priced as if two unrelated parties are entering into a transaction in the open market. This is basically what transfer pricing is all about. And the purpose of this, from a taxation perspective, is that the two parties do not, through pricing mechanism, transfer profits out of India or from a US perspective out of US. So say, for example, either I jack up the sales price or I reduce the cost, whichever way, whatever happens, say, in an outside country, and thereby you shift the profit from India to overseas or vice versa. That is what transfer pricing seeks to plug. So this is essentially what transfer pricing is all about. Whenever two international related parties enter into a transaction, it needs to be as if it is entered into by unrelated parties in open market conditions.
Great. I think that was a wonderful context setting in terms of what is transfer pricing. So as I hear from you, this is definitely for, between parties that are related, it could be one is in one country, another in a country like US. It's also applicable for organizations that are domestic and doing domestic transactions, but are related as well, right? Is that right?
So there are specific provisions for domestic. For international, every international transaction has to be transfer priced. It is mandatory. For domestic, there are very specific transactions, like transactions between a non-tax holiday unit and a tax holiday unit. So just an example, in India, at least from an income tax perspective, there are special economic zones where there is 100% tax holiday. They don't pay any taxes. And there are other domestic units who pay taxes. So if today there is a transaction between a tax holiday and a non-tax holiday unit, there may be people who may try to shift the profit to a tax holiday unit because obviously they are not paying any tax. So that also is sought to be plugged by transfer pricing, but those are very specific transactions. All transactions are not really subject to transfer pricing per se.
Great. I think the second aspect that people would also like to hear from you is, how do the rules and regulations really impact the business operations, especially in the IT and IT sector? What's the nature of impact?
Yeah. So there are 2-3 things. One is, and while we are talking about transfer pricing, there are certain things where you need to have your IP capitalized. These are all practical challenges which people look at. So people's IPs are not in place. That is something which needs to be in place, whether you are getting it done through a related party overseas or whether you're doing it in-house. Please ensure that your IP is capitalized. Now, say for example, today, now I'm right now in the context of international, because transfer pricing, when we say, it is broadly international, but it applies domestically, as you mentioned, in certain cases. So say for example, today, there is a overseas, now when you have an Indian company and you have customers in the US. So obviously you are going to set up some sort of a company in the US through which you do your business. And because of which there will be a transfer pricing to be done. So as per the rules, you need to carry out what we call an arm's length analysis. That arm's length analysis needs to be documented as to what you've done. So the rules provide various methodologies. I will not get into the technicals of it, but say for example, today India is entering services to US. The rules say that you can charge a cost plus markup, or say for example, the reverse. If US is say a distributor entity and India is the service provider entity, and US is selling the product or say licensing a software to customers in the US, and back to back that intellectual property is owned by India, then ultimately US will retain an arm's length margin, and that margin has to be computed and balance will be paid to India. All these arrangements as to what method did you apply to arrive at the arm's length margin has to be documented, and there is a certificate to be issued by a chartered accountant which you have to submit along with your tax return to say that this is my transaction, this is the methodology which I've adopted to justify the arm's length price, and you need to keep your documentation ready to show that yes, if the officer asks you on what basis did you arrive at your arm's length price, you need to have that entire documentation ready with you before you file your transfer pricing certification, technically in Form 3CEB. So this is the compliance and the rules which are required. Obviously, things are far more complicated and far more elaborate, but in a nutshell, this is what anybody who is actually having international transactions or domestic transfer pricing transactions, or potentially you want to do it, this is something you need to be very clear about. That one is a certification and the other is the documentation, documenting the entire methodology of how you have done it. And this is a year-on-year exercise. So it is not a one-time thing that you do. Every year you need to do this at the time of filing your tax return.
Absolutely. Great. I think that's, you've laid it nicely in simple language for people to understand, whether they are startups or SMEs, whoever is on, in the participant list. I see a good participant number here. We have about 55 people out here joined together at this hour talking. So it's great. So my question is, just triggering it back based on what Pankaj just said, Mr. Venkatraman, I'm coming to you next. How do you think the government IT department looks at enterprises in the IT and ITES industry differently? What's special?
Yeah, so I think that's interesting. I think if you look at the income tax assessments companies go through, and given the nature of this space, it is highly litigated. I think there are always litigations companies are with the department for different areas. But one of the highly litigated areas within the tax space for corporates is transfer pricing. And that is also because of how the income tax department looks at companies whenever there is a transfer pricing assessment to be done. And while generally they do understand the difference between an IT and ITES company and what we do, but as it comes to transfer pricing assessments, I think that's when some of these lines gets blurred, and which creates a number of challenges for corporates. So, for example, if you look at the space of IT services industry in India, I think the number of software companies in India are huge, and the scale and size of each of these companies are very, very different, right? And of course, it is not only just services companies. I think there are also product companies like Subex, where while we can be broadly categorized under the ITES as a set of companies, but software product companies, operations, margins, cost structure is a little different compared to a services company. And similarly, the services, even within the services company, a large services company with a very big brand name would command a certain kind of a premium and a pricing for their services, and the cost structure would be different versus a not so large or a medium or a SME setup, which is in the same space, but not necessarily the same cost structure. So, and as Pankaj was talking about, I think one of the most hotly debated or heavily litigated area is about the arm's length pricing and the margins which companies come up with when they file their returns for assessments. And that's where the department does their own assessment of what they believe is the ideal margins for companies to be at. And let's say if a company files their returns with a certain level of margins, then they do an assessment to say, these are the typical comparable companies I would compare you with, and these companies have a higher margin profile than what you have submitted in your return, and therefore there is a adjustment to be done and a higher tax to be paid with the corporate. And the key point is, I think, while it's not that the department doesn't recognize, but I think when these assessments are done and when comparators are drawn up, typically it's a very, very heterogeneous mix of companies which are picked up for such comparisons, which creates the opportunities for disagreement between the SSC, this is a company, and the department. And then it goes through various levels of litigation before it gets resolved. So I think if that's fine-tuned a little more and the right set of comparator companies are taken, I think both sides would save a lot of time and energy in terms of getting these assessments done faster and not having to deal with and incur additional costs through a combination of internal experts and consultants helping them go through this process. So I think that's what I see currently. And of course, there's opportunity for improvement here for sure.
Great, thanks for that perspective. Being an enterprise in this space, you definitely know it from practical experiences to what's happening out there. So picking up the thread, I think, Pankaj, you might also be able to throw some light on what are currently the practical challenges from law perspective and from tax authority perspective. Being a consulting firm, the challenges that some of the enterprises you're interacting with, you can share and tell us what are the, challenges that they're really undergoing.
Sure. So yes, in fact, what Mr. Venkatraman mentioned. So let me give you two very critical statistics, which will tell you what is this litigation in transfer pricing in India. One, at its peak in India, the amount under litigation in transfer pricing, and I'm not talking about pure ITES, I'm talking overall, was 2 lakh crore. That was the amount under transfer pricing litigation in India. Wow. And if you see at a global scale, the transfer pricing litigation in India was 70% of total global litigation. That is TP litigation in India, the magnitude of it. And there is a reason for it. For India, transfer pricing was still new, say it came in 2002-3. And we are still in the process of evolution. The tax authorities at some point in time had no clue about it. Now, after say several years of assessments and litigation, now they have half knowledge. So, as you say, half knowledge is always worse than either zero knowledge or full knowledge. And this is where the entire problem is. Number two is transfer pricing is a business focused analysis. It is not an income tax like a interpretation of corporate tax where you have a comma and a full stop and a Supreme Court judgment. This is business. Now, one businessman has a different sense of pricing, other businessman has a different sense of pricing. So two businessmen can have two different prices. So why the tax officer and the taxpayer doesn't have the two set of prices? This is where the entire problem is. You can justify any price through your own business realities. So this is one of the biggest practical challenges which people face, as in fact Mr. Venkatraman mentioned, that how do I justify that my price is right? Because in business everybody is right. So why am I right? So essentially, we need to ensure that we stick to the technicals. There are specific rules provided under the law. You follow the rules to the T. You make all the documentation possible. You make all the evidences with you as to why the business. Because many a times we have seen that, especially at startup levels and even at advanced companies levels, people are very hesitant of maintaining evidences. People, take things for granted that, oh, this is what it is. How can somebody challenge me? But believe me, the tax officer is going to challenge you. So today, if you believe that, oh, in Hindi, if I may say, it's a hum keh rahe na. So, but sir, आपके कहने से नहीं होता. Today, the officer requires evidence. Without evidence, the officer is not going to take you at face value. This is one of the biggest thing which I would like to request my startup friends, and we have seen this in due diligence. So number one thing what we believe should be done is you need to be due diligence ready. So you are definitely going to look at investor, you're going to look at whatever. So to be due diligence ready, you need to be immaculate in your compliance, immaculate in your technical and your evidences and your documentation. Because this is missing at the time of the tax assessment, we are always found wanting, and then we are always grappling with how do I justify this? What I am doing is absolutely justifiable. I know that I am right, but then how do I convince the other person? That we are not able to do. So while yes, all of these things should be done, the officer should be educated, all of that, but we from our side, we need to take the diligence and ensure that we have all the evidences in place to make our case, and this is missing today.
Got it. That's a very, very important, input, because documentation is something that, falls behind when we are focusing on business transactions, especially when it comes to SMEs who are, scaling up fast and are really growing. Then the focus tends to be more on dhanda pe dhyan do,
Correct.
Understandable, very valuable. Thanks for that, Pankaj. I'm now going to go to Ashish, Mr. Ashish Jain. So you, represent the industry in the IT/ITES sector. You've been there. So what has been your experience with challenges that emerge from transfer pricing? Sorry, Ashish, you're on mute possibly. I'm not able to hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So I was on mute.
Yeah.
So, Shalini, as we heard from Pankaj and Venkatraman, that there are perennial challenges which each industry was facing. And those were the universal challenges for the transfer pricing, like satisfying the officer with the transfer pricing markup, where you will come out with the A, B, C markup, and he will always come out with the XYZ markup. And there are practical challenges for the documentation and how to set up the markup. So each and every industry was grappling around for all these challenges. But in our case, particularly in the IT/ITES industry, post-COVID, there is a very unique challenge where which each and every industry was facing. And so is the case with my company also. So in March 2020, when this entire COVID started, then and that was a peak period where everybody has to close their books and finalize the accounts and all. So at that time, there was all around uncertainty, all around confusion. So we already were grappling around with the markups, and then this created typical kind of a situation where you don't know how future will work and what kind of a markup you will get and what kind of benchmarking you will get. So it's all around uncertainty towards the entire transfer pricing and towards the entire taxation scenario. So and one of the typical challenge in transfer pricing is that you have to go for your benchmark analysis almost by next year. So by November, when you have to file the return, at that time you have to do your transfer pricing study and you have to justify the markup, while you have to close your book by say March or April and May. So now in the current scenario where COVID is going on and everything is uncertain, then it was very difficult to finalize the markup, to finalize the transfer pricing. That is the one kind of challenges. And then suddenly the entire IT industry found a different kind of challenge. So in the March, where everybody was projecting that there will be a big loss and nobody is aware that how the future will turn up. But suddenly there are big profits in the IT industry. And so everybody was grappling around to find the solution. So whether to close the last year with the loss scenario, how to tackle this very unique situation where in the March we were projecting a heavy loss, and somewhere down the line when we reach next year, maybe by June, July, August, or maybe by December, then everything was turning around to the big profit. So there was a big challenge which I think every IT industry faced, and we also faced. That how to put the markup and how to justify and how to do the benchmarking. So this was a very difficult and practical challenge which we grappled around regarding the transfer price.
Wonderful example, Ashish. Actually, that's so real, and thanks for sharing it. In a candid manner like this, because we have to consider the current scenario that organizations are, especially the IT industry, is going through this at this point of time. So I think that was a great input coming from you, and I would like you to also add value to the next step in terms of how are you kind of if you could share some more examples of how you're dealing with transfer pricing issues that are emerging even before pandemic, as well as those are generic issues, but also post, both.
Yeah, sure. So while we were grappling around with this situation, then what I personally realized being the CFO of the company, that transfer pricing normally should not be looked at from the tax angle, as Pankaj was rightly saying, and Venkat was also rightly saying, that transfer pricing is totally governed by your business. So instead of what we thought, that instead of we as a finance team grappling around with this entire thing, why not to check with our operation team? Why not to check with our business team? And why not to involve them? Because they know the practical challenges, they know the practical difficulties. So the first step which we took is make everybody as a stakeholder in this situation, rather than taking it as a finance job, or taking it as a problem which is relating to the finance. And that gave us a very good input, because they know the ground reality, they know the business aspect. And since it's a transfer pricing, it not only covers the India, it also covers the US, it also covers the Germany. So when we had a discussion with them, then we came out with some unique features, and that helped in changing our transfer pricing methodology and transfer pricing study also. And then we bounced back those ideas with our transfer pricing consultant and came out with a different transfer pricing methodology, which is not at all matching with our business dynamics, but also it's easy for us to justify, because it's going with our normal workflow, it's going with our business case scenario. So it's very easy for us to justify with the live business examples and the live support. That is the first important thing. So involving everybody, especially the business team. Second thing which we adopted in this typical or the unrealistic scenario is don't look transfer pricing in isolation. So not only from the tax aspect, but you have to look from the cash flow aspect. You have to look from your profitability aspect. And second thing, don't do the transfer pricing study for 1 year. You have to take like 3 years, 4 years down the line scenario. And especially for the IT industries where things are changing so fast that the moment you come out with a markup of one business model, the business model totally change. So it's an ever changing and ever obsolete kind of a scenario in IT industries. Earlier, we were grappling around with the software taxation and whether software is a product or a services. Then the entire IT industry changes. It changes into the SaaS model. Now everything is coming out with say on the cloud. So the concept of like justifying the substance. Normally, the substance in the eyes of the income tax officer is more relating to how many employees you have, how many offices you have. But in IT industries, it's totally changed scenario where everything you can put on the cloud, and even though there is a big revenue in your subsidiaries or in your AE associates. So in these type of scenario, it's better to do the thorough analysis and then come out with your markup and the profit distribution scenario, because maybe you can save the tax in one scenario, but when you see in totality, for example, by having a differential tax rate in one geo versus another geo, there is a cash accumulation in the another geo. So you might lose out the treasury advantage, you might lose out the advantage which you could have by bringing the money to a high tax jurisdiction and all. So you have to see in totality from all the angles, not only from tax, you have to see from the cash flow angle, and you have to see for a 2 years or 3 years down the line. So these are the methods which we adopted, and then we try to resolve. Although it's non-resolving exercise, but we try to resolve to a little bit by applying these solutions.
No, great. That was very real, suggestions that you're given on ground that somebody can follow. And as you rightly said, it's ongoing. I'm sure there is a lot that we can keep on improvising and playing it up as the IT department also it's on their journey of the learning curve on this topic. So great. So I think we
interestingly, Shalini, I've been to so many panels. This is probably for the first time we are having and as Mr. Jain has pointed out, problem of plenty of having because many customers in various sectors whom we have spoken are saying about challenges in business, but I think Mr. Jain seems to have completely a different challenge, which is a problem of plenty and how to deal with that. So it's a very interesting concept which Mr. Jain has come out with.
Right, very true, Vaibhav, very rightly said. And I would love to hear more, and I'm sure participants are waiting to hear more on this aspect. And participants, please add in more questions. I'm sure there are lots on your mind. Just feel free to type them into Q&A. And to hear more on what are some of the best practices, good practices that you would recommend, Mr. Venkatraman. We would love to hear from you, and what are some guidance practices that you would suggest to SMEs on the way forward?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I think both Pankil and Ashish covered a number of the best practices, both from a general perspective and very specifically what Ashish was talking about from his perspective, company. I think few things, of course, I think the most important element with transfer pricing is documentation. I think Pankil spoke about it multiple times. It's exhaustive documentation and documentation before those transactions are put through, right? I think many times a lot of this is attempted post facto, and that's where you get into trouble because you have not necessarily thought through all the angles as those transactions are being put through. And then when there's an assessment, you're trying to find ways of getting your documentation in order, which is why I think it's important. And equally, I think how well do you understand the business and then talk to the business for you to, before you put your transfer pricing framework and policy in place, right? Because You can always have a finance view of cost, profitability, which can be justified with a set of comparators or benchmarks which you use. But I think it's important to understand your business and therefore how does it make sense. And typically, particularly, I think some areas where you will get very good inputs from the businesses in terms of what kind, let's say if you're pricing your service or product at a certain level to your subsidiary, you'll get very good inputs in terms of how does it compare with comparators, how does it compare with competition in the specific space the company is present in. So therefore, I think it's always good to have those conversations early on before you put your policy in place. And of course, not cherry pick, right? But typically the tendency and the temptation is also to do cherry picking in terms of saying that, okay, this I will apply a certain percentage and this I will not, or this I will not do a transfer pricing for whatever reasons. So when you do such things, you're obviously opening up yourself for the officer to pick up those and say that this is not something which is acceptable. So how do you not get into those? And then equally, I think as you start putting this together, have a very clear defined policy on costs, which can be very clearly documented and established, so that it is then you can demonstrate as and when you get to those situations, saying that is not something you have thought of now in response to an assessment which is ongoing, versus saying that this is a standard policy of the firm, this is how we look at costs, and this is what we do with all our subsidiaries, whichever geographies they operate under. So I think those are good practices which will help. But equally, I think the department has also become smarter, and they have also got some very, very smart officers who are using technology and leveraging what is available in the public domain to do their assessment. For example, if you have some of these officers who are smart enough to go and look at LinkedIn profiles of your employees, and they'll just say, okay, you say that you have so many employees, and you see the profiles of your tech guys being of this order, and then you say that you don't have costs or you're not able to charge premium for your services. So it is not just keeping your documents in order, it has to fall in place. It has to be a story which can be stitched together from all angles. It's not about just saying that, okay, I've got all my documents in place, so I'm good. So I think the department also is smart enough, and I think rightly so. I think they've also have a role to play, right? I think they have a role to play in terms of optimizing revenues for the government. As much as CFOs, you would want to optimize your tax, not necessarily to avoid. So I think equally, you need to be aware of such situations which can come in. What kind of news reports which are being published about the company, what kind of interviews the senior management of the company is giving. So all of that does get picked up, and people, or the annual report, I think companies take pride in what they write in their annual reports. I think some of them are fairly good marketing material as well, right? So I think what do you write in that? All of that can get picked up and get related back to. So equally, we need to be mindful of what we say there and how does it link back to the papers and the returns which you file. So I think those are aspects to be kept in mind. But I think I think as one other point, I think Ashish was making that point, right? Equally, we also need to, I think the department also needs to factor in some of these unique situations, right? For example, the pandemic situation he spoke about. So is it fair to look at a company by just based on 1 year's numbers to say that, okay, last year you had a higher profitability or low profitability versus, let's say, a previous year. So given this current situation, maybe there is a need to be a little more flexible to look at it over a range of years to see how do you compare and look at companies when you're making those calls on assessments. I think it has even become more complex now with this remote assessments which the government has put in place. While the purpose of that was obviously in very good intentions, in some of these complex transactions, it's impossible or very difficult for a company to explain what is the reason why something has been done with just a bunch of documents being uploaded and you don't know who's the assessing officer and how is he looking at it, right? So I think those are complex problems to deal with. They're not easy solutions, but I think some of these aspects also needs to be kept in mind.
Great. I picked up a very interesting point, how the department is using IT to deal with the IT industry. Yeah. That's very interesting to see, it's coming back to you as an industry. And definitely as we are moving forward, there is going to be more and more use of data aggregation and consolidation across various platforms. Yeah. And that's going to be a powerful tool, just as it is for business, it's also going to be for the department, right? So yeah. Great. And I think importantly, I hope participants picked up the best practices that came out both from both from Mr. Venkatraman and Mr. Ashish, as they explained to you. Laying down certain policies and documentation well in advance, and making it seamless as an operation rather than a knee-jerk reaction to something is coming out as a very important point to pick up. So I think we are getting a lot many questions, but I hope that this is engaging enough for everybody. And if there are more points to add, please feel free into adding into this as panelists, because this is where we are talking real stuff about transfer pricing and what's happening right now, in the current COVID scenario as well. If anyone would like to add anything more before we move forward.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I was listening to Mr. Venkatraman as well as to Ashish. One is the education part of it. So as Mr. Venkatraman said, that now the tax office is looking at various different data points to challenge you, to ask you more questions. Now they have also started the practice of interviewing business folks, or asking them for documentation. And as you said, you see somebody's LinkedIn profile. Now imagine, as we said, we are saying that we are a low risk cost plus service provider. Now this is a technical term, but this is typically what we say and we say that yes, my margin should be a very minimal margin, because I'm a very the technical term is insignificant people functions is what we do here. Now, when the tax officer will say an ex business person who is doing this day in and day out, while we know that an ex gentleman is working under direct instructions, say from a US, and India is doing more execution based activity, when that gentleman will talk to the officer or talk to whoever, nobody is going to undermine their own role. It's human nature. So everybody will try to showcase that what I am doing is God's gift to mankind. Now, once that happens, whatever you have said till now collapses. The officer said your own business head is saying that you are doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So here is X into 5 of your tax demand, and that is it. Your own officer has admitted to that. Now we know what it is. So apart from looking at the internet and what is there available publicly or otherwise, it is very important to educate your people on the fact that what are we trying to say? What is it that we need to ensure we are aligned with in terms of our submitting to the tax office? And in case questioned, what is it? And we are not saying we say something wrong, but we are just saying that you say what is the correct thing in the correct way. That's one which is very critical. The other thing is not only what is in public domain. Now the IT system of the government is so powerful that every possible data point is accessible to them. So there is customs law, there is GST law, there is audit, there is your company law filings, there is FEMA, foreign exchange filings. We have seen when you actually do that groundwork, what you have put in corporate tax versus in GST, in customs, in company law, in foreign exchange. All 5 things have a different narrative for the same thing. The same company has given 5 different patterns to 5 different laws for the same item. Now, we have seen this and it becomes very difficult to explain. And there is a reason for it. The FEMA office is done by an ex-person who is dealing with a banker. The customs person is separate. The income tax person is separate. The TDS person is separate. So, and all 5 people are talking different languages. And when we actually try to consolidate everything, it's very, very difficult to convince the officer as to why my person said something to custom which is different to what I'm telling you. So even that is very critical to understand, that the officer today has data points from each and every legislation. So what statement you make has to be aligned across the board.
Very true, Pankaj. Thanks so much for bringing up this aspect, because I think that's where the role of the CFO is becoming a lot more challenging than before, because there is a lot more transparency and availability of information to add and play along, every declaration that we're giving as enterprises. So it has to be, integrated as an approach to external authorities and stakeholders. So great. So on that note, I'm going to move to our next panelist, Vaibhav. So from a global trade perspective, and because we're talking of transfer pricing, especially to augment the global trade. So what are some of the import-export regularizations? And, can you throw some light on this aspect for our enterprises today?
Yeah, I think from a banking perspective, having the transactions from an ITITS company, especially from the inward remittances perspective, are fairly simple. If you are a STPI or a non-STPI unit, in fact, today there are many banks, including us, are offering solutions which are more digital in nature. Previously, you used to submit physical document for your soft tax regularization. I think, as many people have pointed out, that the technology is now coming into play. In fact, now the systems of the government, DGFT, the RBI, the bank, and in the case of STPI, they are all now connected. So what happens is, now everything is moving towards digital things. So instead, you don't need to submit physical document for your export regularization. What you can do is, we have a platform called a Digitate platform. You can submit an Excel sheet because the system will automatically pick data from the EDPMS site and will regularize your exports. And that becomes a far more simpler process. You don't need to spend heaps of paper. It becomes simpler for the banks. It's become simpler for the companies, and it's become simpler for everyone. So I think there are plenty of now the solutions available for the IT companies. Well, yes, when there are tax payments to be made and all those things, then there are A2 forms and all those things. Those need to be still submitted on the physical mode. But I think on the export side and on the import side, if it's a fairly an open account transaction, then it's fairly digital. You don't need to submit many documents. In fact, you just need to submit an Excel sheet, and the documentation would get regularized. So I think banking again is evolving fast. It's evolving to the needs of the industry, and I think the important aspect is for companies to choose a bank which can help digital solutions, where today, frankly, today only for a cash transaction you need to physically go to a bank. Otherwise, 99% of your business transactions can be done over digital, which includes regularization of export proceeds, and there are various methods. So, for example, we suggest that clients to have an EEFC account, which is an exchange earner foreign currency account, where depending on your requirement, you can do conversion at your will, at your time, at your choice, and we believe at the bank level absolute transparency on the forex pricing. So that really helps the companies to plan their cash flows in a much efficient manner. But I think today banking, and again, as somebody was pointing out, that the COVID has accelerated that process. In fact, our own internal systems have evolved so fast and so important from a digital perspective in the last couple of months. It's phenomenal. So therefore, from that perspective, I think banking has also responded to the requirements of industry moving in a digital manner quite fast.
Great. Thanks for that update, Vaibhav, in terms of how the bank is looking at this. So anything that HSBC is doing specifically to augment MSMEs national business?
Yeah, so I mean, many SME companies struggle for finding an international banking partner. So, for example, as in my introduction, it was mentioned that I look at the India-US corridor. We are now helping, irrespective of the size of the company, to go international. So, for example, there are various advantages of having one international bank, because you don't need to deal with various banks in various geographies. So it becomes the life of a finance professional much easier, because you deal with only one bank, and at a one person, say for example in India, that person, if India is the main entity from where the finance is controlled, we have something called as a global relationship manager concept. So that person will coordinate for you for all other geographies. It makes commercial sense because the transaction between HSBC Group are far more commercially cheaper as compared to when you do other bank transactions. So we are helping companies in many geographies, especially where HSBC has significant presence. So, for example, US, UK, Singapore, many places in Middle East and Southeast Asia, where we have a significant presence, and that for us has been a big, game changer, because many businesses find dealing, and today, frankly, there is no bank in India which can support businesses in many geographies. I mean, there are foreign banks in India, but they are either a large corporate bank or they are only typically for multinational companies. We are now supporting the SMEs. In fact, we have plenty of startups, because we are seeing, for example, I think there was this mention of SaaS. We have many SaaS startups, because SaaS is a model which is typically an IT services kind of a model. Where we are supporting companies in US, UK, Singapore, in fact, many geographies, Australia. So therefore, from that perspective, we have now find a very great niche for ourselves in supporting SME companies who have international ambitions.
Great. That's great to know, because many of the participants here would definitely, like to consider this aspect, and that would be quite useful for them. So I think we've done a good amount of talking amongst ourselves as panelists, and now I think would be a good time to take up questions from participants. Please start typing in, and I'm going to I'll begin with the first question that we have here, which is there any threshold for TP officer to look into a company? Like, for example, if the turnover is less than 10 crore, will it escape transfer pricing? And want to know how the transfer pricing scrutiny cases are chosen.
So let me take that question. So no, there is absolutely no threshold technically for any officer to challenge a transaction. It could be from 1 rupee to infinite. Whatever it is, the officer can challenge. And the officer can, in fact, make it from 1 rupee to 1,000 crores. If he feels that 1,000 crore transaction has been done for 1 rupee, then 1 rupee can become 1,000 crores in a transfer pricing adjustment. So there is no threshold whatsoever. Now, there are some internal instructions which have been given by the Central Board of Direct Taxes, which we call CBDT, which is essentially the top income tax body, to the officers on how to select. So there are two kinds. Let me not get too technical into this. This is not really the forum. So there are two ways. One is CAS system, which is called computer aided selection of scrutiny. So there are some parameters which are fed into the system, and the system throws up cases to be picked up. There is another internal instruction. It's instruction 3 of whatever 2016, which says that there are certain pointers which have been given. So if there is a issue on whether something is international transaction or not, if there is a X amount of transfer pricing dispute in the earlier years, then that case has to be picked up. If there is, say, a different kind of, say, a business reorganization, then that has to be picked up. So there are certain instructions given to the officer as to which has to be picked up. One is at CAS level, or one is if they fall under those parameters, but there is no technical threshold as such. It's just an internal instruction.
Okay, great. I hope that answers the question for the participant. We'll move to the next question. When should we get the first report? At the time of doing the transaction or at the time of submitting the IT return?
Should I take it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So yes, the law says that your transfer pricing report has to be at the end of the year. So it has to be kept ready. I'm just using the word. It has to be kept ready at the time of filing of the return, and it can be submitted whenever the officer asks for it. That transfer pricing report is not to be filed. Only the form 3CEB is to be filed with the return, but it has to be kept ready before filing the form 3CEB. That is the law. Now, the question is, But if that happens at the end of the year, when I'm entering into the transaction, what pricing should I should do it at what price? So that is not part of the law, but what we say. So that is like an advisory. What we say is you need, so this is again another technical term we use is a planning study. So you have to do a study. Now that study will not be final, but that will use last year's financial numbers of the comparable companies. Obviously, the current year numbers will come at the end of the current year. But last year numbers we have during the planning study when you're entering into the transaction. Now the thought process would be that unless there is a huge business fluctuation, the last year's numbers and the current year's numbers will not be too different. So say for example, I do that planning study based on last year's numbers. It throws say cost plus 12% as the arm's length margin. I will say I will keep on a conservative basis cost plus 15% or 17% or 18%. This is typically how we do it. A planning study is not legally required, but it will be advisable to do a planning study to at least know a ballpark number, or not even a ballpark, but something in the vicinity of what would you would see in the next year. The last year and next year is not going to change too much. So yes, planning study at the start, it may be a one-time exercise, and then you use that same pricing year on year, maybe a little bit here or there depending on your business fluctuation, and then you keep doing your justification study at the time of filing the return.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Thank you. So the next question with us out here is TP margin as a percentage does not change whether the firm is making profit or loss. So a little bit of clarity on this might be helpful if somebody wants to throw light on this.
Ashish, do you want to take that? I think that's something which you had commented about. Maybe you want to clarify.
Yeah. So, yeah, sure. So, yeah, I think technically they are right. The participant is right that normally you can't change the TP margin unless and until you have a justifiable reason of a change in the business process or change in the business scenario and all. What I was suggesting in the context of the pandemic, where normally we have the normal margin or normal markup, as Pankaj was suggesting that in the planning stage, we decided for some kind of a markup. But during the pandemic, we had to rethink on that markup because there was all around uncertainty, and it was difficult for everyone to justify those markup and to come out with a benchmark study and all. So I was talking from that context that in such extreme scenario, you have to rethink on your transfer pricing markup and transfer pricing study. In the normal scenario, you are right that there should not be any changes in the markup.
Right. Thanks for that clarification, Ashish. I'm sure that was helpful. So there are a couple of more questions that have come privately that I would like to take up quickly here. One is how to take care of brand trademark fees paid from one company to another. So is any of the organizations currently, doing this? You can respond on that.
So in case Ashish or Mr. Venkatraman, you want to take it up, or
maybe I'll give it a shot. Maybe Pankaj, you will have a lot more comparable companies to give your views on. I think it's again a tricky area. I think this brand fees is again an area which is susceptible to be questioned in terms of whatever fees you are charging to which you're paying to your parent, or which is the parent outside as brand fees, or even within India for that matter, because there are some companies who do it in India as well. It is quote unquote can be questioned in terms of what is the rationale. But I think as long as it is consistent and there is a reasonable history in terms of how it has been arrived at and what is the basis, you should be able to make a case to justify what has been charged. But I think the caveat remains. It can be questioned, and you need to be prepared for that, and therefore have your backup documents and supportings to make your case.
Absolutely. So if I may just take half a minute. So there are three things in this, and again, this is not a training session, so I will be very business focused. One is, first question to ask is whether or not the the fees should be paid or not for use of brand. So we are talking about usage of brand, right? So when somebody is giving the brand and that IP is being used, you have to basically pay brand fees or royalty is what you call it. So the question is, many a times in a related party transaction, is it mandatory to charge royalty or not? So that is number one. The question is and there is a High Court judgment which says that if a prudent businessman does not feel it prudent to charge royalty to an already loss-making subsidiary, you cannot challenge the principles of prudency. So you cannot make somebody charge royalty if you don't want to charge royalty. So that is number one. It's up to you whether you charge royalty or not. So that is one. It should be justifiable as to why you are not charging, but it's not necessary to charge. Number two is that if you are charging, then how do you justify that royalty? You may have direct comparables in the market. There are reports in certain cases. There are industry reports like NASSCOM. They will publish some percentages. In pharma, they have some percentages. So there are ways there are external sources or even internal sources where suppose you are giving it to somebody and you are giving the same thing to somebody in some other country. So maybe to an external party, and in one country you are giving to related party. You will look at it. So that is one. And if nothing works, you have even valuation of the IP. So you value the IP and then you take a percentage of it. So there are all different methods in-house. And the last resort is that, see, in SEC filing, your SEC has 10K filings. So in there, in overseas, you have to publish your royalty agreements. And then there are databases who have picked up all those agreements, and those are available for a fee. So we use those databases, put in the parameters of the royalty agreement which we want to do. There will be like 10, 15 agreements based on our parameters, which the database will throw up. You look at it qualitatively, and whatever are the margins there, then those you can average out and you can use it as a royalty. These are data. This is the methodology used even by the tax. So when they do it, they also do the same thing. They use the same database. They pick up the agreements and then they average out the rates. I am making it out to very simple. Believe me, it's not. It's a pretty complicated exercise. But yes, this is all in all how you justify royalty. Brand use.
Great. That was quite a comprehensive response, I should say, between Ashish and Mr. Venkatraman. Sorry, and Pankaj. Yeah. So there are a couple of more questions, though we're already at 6:30. I hope we can take these. One is around any view on excluding the COVID-related expenses as non-operating expense for cost plus markup working. Any view on this one? So
I think I'll be quiet now because I've spoken a lot.
Yeah, so I think you can definitely make a case, but I think it's up to the assisting officer to accept your point of view or not. But yes, these are exceptional situations, and if there is a good enough case you're able to make and have the reasoning, I think there's no harm in trying. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think anything which is non-standard creates an opportunity for it to be questioned, and therefore then you get into that whole cycle of going through those multiple hoops before you get to a point of conclusion. But yes, I think there is a case, but of course you'll have to go through that cycle.
Got it. And what kind of documents one should have to justify the transaction value?
I think Pankaj spoke about it. I think there are reports which you will need to have. There are TP reports which you can do to get comparators looked at. And there are industry reports. I think even that Pankaj touched upon. So there are a number of documents available. It's a combination of industry reports, your own industry associations you're part of, which might have some benchmarking data that they can share, or the specific commissioned comparable reports which the companies will have to anyway do as part of their transfer pricing filing. So those are the set of documents you will typically file.
All right, great. So the last question I think for the evening is here, which is, has the safe harbor rule been extended for the year ended March 21 as per income tax?
No, let me take that. No, not as of now, but it is expected. It will happen. It's fairly automatic. Technically, it does not happen, but it is going to happen. Just for the benefit, maybe we have already crossed. So just to touch upon, to avoid or not avoid, but to maybe mitigate litigation on this point, we've spoken about how much litigation is there in transfer pricing in India. There are safe harbor rules which have been issued by the government. So saying that if there is a particular kind of transaction, and if you use that margin in the safe harbor rules, then anything else will not be challenged by the tax officer. There will be no litigation on that. That margin is like a agreed margin, and your case will not be touched for litigation. So that is a safe harbor rule which has been issued, and it can be used effectively by the taxpayers to avoid these litigations and these protracted assessments, etc. Just use the margin and finish it. That's it.
Great. Thanks so much, Pankil. And we've with that answered practically all the questions that participants have had today. And we have 47 people with us at this juncture as well. So it's been brilliant discussion. I would believe the last 1 hour has gone very, very well. And we've got some great insights, coming ahead from the guidance of the industry experts who've been on the panel with us today. And therefore, I would like to take the opportunity of thanking each one of you panelists, Mr. Pankil Sanghvi, Mr. G.S. Venkatraman, Mr. Ashish Jain, and Mr. Vaibhav Gupta, for sparing your really precious time and coming out and helping our participant MSMEs understand a little bit more on the topic of transfer pricing, a lot more actually. And I hope all of you participants have also gained immensely from this. A special thanks to our partner HSBC, without whom this initiative would just not have been possible. So really thanks to them. And for more details on HSBC and how they support your business, I'm sure on the chat box you've seen the website provided to you. Please click there and have a look and know more about them. This is just the first of the 3 series that we are conducting for IT and ITES industry in particular. So please watch the space for more. There are a lot more topics that are relevant for IT and ITES sector coming up in your benefit. Stay tuned with us, and to be connected with us, you can log on to and sign up, one-time sign up onto our portal, which is www.indiasmeaccelerator.net. It's just a single one-time sign up, and you will be getting access throughout for business tools, resources, updates from us all the time. So with that, we're coming to the end, and we conclude our session. Thanks to each one of you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Shalini, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Great. If there are any more questions, please write into us at support@indiasmeaccelerator.com, and we'll try to stay in touch with you. Bye-bye.